Imagine being hungry, but not the kind of hunger that makes you feel, "I ate badly today." Real hunger, the kind that makes your stomach hurt, your head spin, and your body tremble with weakness. Imagine having only one piece of stale bread, the last one, and knowing that that little piece would be your only chance to eat that day. Now imagine seeing someone even worse off than you, lying on the sidewalk, dirty, shivering from the cold, with their eyes wide open, with no one to see. And yet, giving that person the only piece of bread you have. That's exactly what this lady did. She didn't think twice. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't care about his appearance. She only saw pain and reached out her hand. But what she didn't know, and what no one there imagined, was that this man who seemed to have nothing actually had everything. He was an African millionaire in disguise, a powerful man who was testing people's hearts. And in that simple gesture, he found something that even his money couldn't buy to this day: real kindness. This is not just another story. It is one of those that makes you shiver, swallow hard, and think, would I have done the same? Get ready for a heartbreaking drama with jaw-dropping twists, moments of outrageous injustice, and a final revelation that changes everything. You'll feel anger, hope, excitement, and just when you think you've seen it all, the story will take a new turn. So sit up straight, take a deep breath, and prepare your heart. Because what happens after she gives you that bread is unbelievable. It was one of those days when the sky seemed to weigh heavily on your shoulders. The morning had barely begun, and the cold was already cutting like a blade, entering through the cracks in the poorly fitted door of the small shack where he lived. Madame Clarice, alone in the world for years, with fragile health and knees aching from old rheumatism that she never had the money to treat, she woke up with a completely empty stomach. It had been days since she had eaten properly, and that morning all she found on the shelf was a single piece of hardened bread, small, dry, and almost odorless. It was all she had, literally. No coffee, no sugar, not a single cent. Just that piece of bread forgotten in time, which seemed to resist as much as she did. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the bread as if she were faced with a difficult choice. Such a small piece, but it meant so much more than just food. It was the last bit of dignity she had. She thought about eating it right there, before weakness overcame her. But for some reason that even she couldn't explain, she put the bread inside her worn-out coat and left. Maybe out of pride, maybe out of habit, maybe just because she needed to breathe. She walked slowly through the narrow streets of the neighborhood, feeling people's eyes passing right by her, as if she didn't exist. She reached the little square on the corner, where she always stopped, for a while to sunbathe. It was then that she saw something that moved her, lying on the ground, leaning against a wall, shivering from the cold, and with his face covered by a dirty handkerchief, was a man. He barely moved, only breathing with difficulty and sobbing softly. Mr. Laurent, as she would later discover, at that moment was nothing more than a stranger left on the street, dirty, invisible, as she also felt every day. Clarice stopped. She stood there, staring. Her stomach was already grumbling, but she knew what she had to do. She knelt down slowly, took the bread out of her pocket, and put it in his hand, without saying anything. His eyes widened, and before he could say anything, she smiled, in that simple, almost sad way, and murmured, "You seem to need it more than I do." Then he slowly stood up, turned his back, and continued walking, without waiting for thanks, without imagining what was about to happen. But what she didn't know is that that man wasn't just a beggar. And what he would do next would change her life forever. If this story touched you, it's not for nothing. It's because deep down you have a heart that truly feels. Here, each story is more than a video. It's a hug for those who were once invisible. It's justice for those who only knew pain. This channel is a refuge for those who believe that good still wins, and that even the smallest gesture can change destinies. So come and be part of this community that breathes emotion, faith, and African stories that touch the soul. Click the like button now, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us, because the next stories will touch your heart even more. She had barely returned home after giving them the bread when she heard that cross voice that she already knew very well. Madame Colette, the neighbor across the street, who spent the whole day at the window with her arms crossed, judging everyone's every move, made a point of raising her voice so that the entire neighborhood could hear. "Look who still thinks she's so good. Clarice, you fool, feeding the garbage on the street while you're dying of hunger inside your house. What are you going to expect this rag to pay you back with? With illness?" The sentence hit like a slap. It wasn't just the tone. It was the cruelty carried in the words, the pleasure Colette had in hurting with her tongue. Clarice, who had been hearing this kind of thing for years, took a deep breath. She didn't answer. She just hugged her coat to her chest and walked into the shack with her head down, feeling shame try to take the place of the courage she had felt minutes before. And the worst part was that the neighbor wasn't the only one who thought so. Others there, neighbors from next door, from the street, from the church, also saw Clarice as a lost woman who didn't know how to grow old properly. "You suffer because you want to," they said. "She lives alone because she scared everyone away." There had always been this kind of whispering around her, as if it were her fault for having lost everything, her husband, her children, her health, her stability, as if poverty were a sign of moral failure, as if she didn't have the right to be good, generous, or even to smile. But that day, Colette's comment hurt more than usual, maybe because she was really tired, because the bread he had given her was all she had left, because the cold was getting stronger. Or maybe because, deep down, she was also afraid of being wrong. What if her kindness was really foolish? What if the world had really changed so much that there was no longer room for simple gestures like that? But then she remembered his face. It was impossible to forget. The image of the man trembling on the sidewalk came back to her mind in its entirety. And then came the part that no one understood, not even Colette with her upturned nose and venomous words. What Clarice saw was not just a dirty, ragged body. It was not just a man lying on the ground. She saw his eyes, and his eyes, my God, his eyes, they were different. They carried an ancient sadness, a silent pain, a loneliness that screamed without sound. It was like looking into a mirror. Not the kind that shows your appearance, but the kind that shows your soul. Clarice knew what it was like to feel invisible. She knew what it was like to be hungry, not just for food, but for humanity, for someone to look you in the eye and say, "You matter." So when she saw that man standing there, she didn't think of dirt or disease or judgment. She thought of compassion. She thought that maybe, at that very moment, he was feeling exactly what she had felt so many times, that the world had forgotten he existed. But the world has a strange habit of judging everything from the outside. And if there's one thing Clarice learned firsthand, it's that, for many people, appearance is worth more than truth. For Colette, for example, clean clothes are a sign of character, and poverty is a reason to be ashamed. That's why she would never understand that gesture. She would never understand that giving away bread was Clarice's way of continuing to be who she was, someone who, despite everything, still believed that doing good is worthwhile. And there's more. What not even Clarice knew was that that man, the one everyone would call a beggar, was hiding a secret that would change everything. Because not always what it seems is, and sometimes the one you think has nothing is the one who has everything, except that it wasn't time to be revealed yet. That moment was just for her kindness, for the judgment of others, and for the cruel injustice that came with it. But it was also the beginning of something bigger, something that no one, not even the sharp-tongued neighbor, would be able to predict. Deep down, Clarice knew she had done the right thing, but she also knew that the world doesn't always reward those who act with their hearts. And that's when a doubt begins to grow. Not a doubt of regret, but of reality. Like, does anyone still value this? Does doing good still come back? And this doubt, however silent it may be, weighs heavily. Even more so when you're alone with an empty stomach and listening to the malicious giggles of those who have never reached out to anyone. The day went on slowly, heavily, with that phrase from her neighbor echoing in her mind. But something inside Clarice insisted on remaining at peace. As if that look from the man, yes, that broken but true look, had left a silent response, a feeling that it had not been in vain, as if soon life would give her a sign. But what? And when? And it is precisely there, in that silence full of questions, that the story begins to take a turn. Because the next day, something completely unexpected happened, something that not even Clarice, with all her kindness, would be able to imagine. But this is what comes next. That night, as Clarice tried to sleep on her thin mattress, feeling the cold wind blowing under the door, the image of the man on the sidewalk wouldn't leave her mind. Something about that look moved her so much. It was as if he had said everything without saying a word. And even without knowing his name, she felt like she had done something right. She could hardly imagine that at that very moment that man also couldn't sleep, not because of the cold, but because of what he had just experienced with her. His name was Mr. Malik, but no one knew that. There in that simple neighborhood, he was there like just another person, another forgotten person, another rejected person, another street scumbag. But Malik was no ordinary beggar. He was one of the most powerful businessmen on the African continent, owner of hotels, companies, shares, properties that many people wouldn't even know how to count. But he carried a void that no amount of money in the world could fill. The void of having been surrounded his entire life by people who only approached him out of self-interest, people who smiled at him because of his bank account, people who shook his hand, already calculating the profit. That's why he decided to disappear for a few days. He chose a random neighborhood, wore torn clothes, left his imported car in storage, and started to walk around like an ordinary man. In fact, less than ordinary. He wanted to experience firsthand what it was like to be seen as a nobody. And the result? It was worse than he imagined. People who crossed the street to avoid him, shopkeepers who threw people out before he could even speak, looks of contempt, laughter, fingers pointing, until she appeared, Madame Clarice. Without knowing who he was, without asking questions, without asking for anything in return, she gave him the last piece of bread she had. Such a small gesture, but it hit him like an earthquake. Because there, on that cold sidewalk, Malik saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. True humanity. Unmasked. Kindness. A person who looked at him as a human being and not as a threat or an opportunity. He stood there for hours after she left, holding the piece of bread in his hand, unable to eat. He was in shock, because it wasn't about the bread. It was about what that gesture said. For the first time in a long time, he felt something inside him breaking. The arrogance, the coldness, the pride, everything began to crumble. He realized he had met someone real, and more, someone he needed to get to. No better. The next morning, Malik made a decision, and that's when he started moving. But how was he going to get close to her again? How was he going to explain who he really was? How was he going to make Clarice trust him after years of being hurt by life and people? These questions kept coming back to him as he planned his next move and what he would do next. No one in that neighborhood, least of all Colette, the gossipy neighbor, was prepared to see. At that moment, as she placed the bread in his hands so carefully, as if she were handing him something sacred, he couldn't believe it. It wasn't just the gesture, it was her manner. No rush, no fear, no look of disgust. Clarice didn't even seem to realize that she was standing there in front of a dirty man with a strong smell, covered in dust and with a beard that had not been shaved for days. None of that mattered to her. What she saw there was pain, and where most people turned their faces away, she extended her hand. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask where he came from. She didn't want to know what he had done with his life to end up like that. None of that. She just sat next to him for a minute and looked into his eyes as if to say, "I see you." And that, for someone who is used to being ignored, is worth more than any food, more than any coin. That was exactly what Malik felt. He, who had already heard businessmen flattering, politicians praising, people trying to please, had never received such a sincere human look. Clarice then stood up slowly. She placed her hand on his shoulder with a lightness that almost made Malik cry right there. And before leaving, she said in a low voice but full of faith, "May God watch over you, my son." That's all. A simple sentence. But to him, it sounded like a blessing he didn't even know he needed to hear. She left without looking back, without expecting thanks, without expecting anything in return. And he stood there, holding that piece of bread as if it were gold. For the first time in a long time, Malik felt that someone saw what he was inside. Not a CEO, not a millionaire, but a man, a human being. And that touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Because Clarice gave without knowing. She loved without knowing. And she prayed without wanting applause. Malik knew that moment had changed something inside him. He just didn't know that it was just the beginning. Because what he would decide to do after that connection, oh, that would turn her life upside down, and in a way that neither she, nor the gossipy neighbor, nor anyone else on the street could imagine. But that comes right after. She was already a few meters away when she heard the first laugh, those quick, short laughs with venom behind them. Clarice recognized that sound from afar. It was the same one she had heard since she became a widow, since she lost everything. The laugh of someone who has never experienced what she experienced, but thinks they have the right to point the finger. A woman, sitting on a bench in the square with her apron still dirty with flour, let out the phrase as if throwing a stone, "Crazy old woman, you'll end up starving to death because of a beggar." More laughter came. Some of it was blatant, others were disguised as friends' comments that were loud enough for her to hear. People pretended to be talking to someone else, but they looked straight at her, with that look of superiority mixed with contempt. "That one has completely lost her mind," whispered a young man leaning against the wall of the bakery. "She's throwing the little she has in the trash on the street. She must have hit her head." A group of young people began to imitate the way she walked, hunched over, with slow steps, and even the way she held her coat closed against her chest, mocking her as if she were a street clown. Clarice heard everything, every word, every laugh, and even without saying a single word, she felt the impact, as if they were slaps in the face. It wasn't just because of what they were saying, it was because of what it confirmed, that being good in that world seemed wrong, that in the eyes of others, helping someone on the streets was a sign of stupidity, not kindness, and worse, of weakness. She thought about turning around and retorting, about saying that the bread might be old, but it was given with love, about asking how many people there with full bellies and laughing out loud had ever really reached out to someone. But she didn't say anything, because she already knew that there was no room for argument. For those people, the logic was clear. Those who have little save it. Those who help others hurt themselves. And those who do good without a camera or an audience are treated like crazy. Clarice kept walking, her head held high as best she could, even with the weight of humiliation on her shoulders. But inside, something was shaking. It wasn't regret. It wasn't anger. It was that bitter feeling of loneliness, the same feeling she had when her son left without leaving a home address, The same feeling she had when her husband left, and left debts she didn't even know where to begin to pay. The same feeling that everyone feels who acts with their heart in a world that has learned to laugh at compassion. Little did she know that right there on the other side of the square, sitting exactly where she had left him, Malik had heard it all. Every laugh, every cruel phrase, every mockery, and it hit him like an avalanche. Because he had seen a lot in life. He had been praised for interest, flattered for money, called a genius by those who only wanted a contract. But never had he seen someone be ridiculed for simply being good, for having a heart, and that affected him in a way that no million-dollar negotiation ever could. Malik stared at those people with a heavy silence. They were laughing at Clarice, but they didn't know who he was. They didn't know. They were laughing at the only person there who still carried something rare, dignity. And at that moment, he made a decision. It wasn't just gratitude that he felt, it was something bigger. It was an almost urgent need to show her, and everyone there, that doing good is never wrong, and that her gesture, which to many seemed foolish, would become the turning point that no one expected. But that twist, that, my friend, is yet to come. That night, Clarice slept with her body aching, but her heart at peace. She was still hungry, her joints were still aching, but something inside her told her she had done the right thing. The image of that man holding the bread so carefully, with his eyes full of tears, came back to her mind several times. She slept holding tightly to the rosary that she kept by her bed, as she had done since she lost her husband. Her prayer that night was short but sincere. Lord, keep giving me strength, that's all. The problem is that peace of mind is not always enough to bear the weight of life's injustices. And the next day, what seemed like a tough routine turned into an even crueler scene. Early in the morning, loud knocks on the door interrupted the little sleep she still managed to get. 3 men, with deep voices and cold eyes, announced what she most feared hearing: eviction. Clarice tried to argue. He said he was already making arrangements with the owner, that he needed a few more days. He explained that he had nowhere to go, that he had no one. But the men weren't there to listen. One of them simply said, "Orders are orders, madam. You have until noon." And they left, as if they had just read a message. Alone, confused, she sat on the edge of the bed and stood there for a few minutes, not knowing what to do. She cried silently in that deep way where not even tears can express the pain that comes from within. Clarice didn't cry just because she was being thrown out. She cried for everything, for loneliness, for being abandoned by her family, for the neighbor who still made fun of her today, for everything she had given in life and never received back. She cried because deep down she thought she would never fall again. And she did. With no choice, he began to gather what little he had. Some old clothes, a torn blanket, old wedding photos, a small pot, a Bible marked with notes from the time when her husband was still alive. He put everything in a worn-out bag that no longer closed properly. Each step to the sidewalk was a farewell not only to the place, but to the hope that things could still get better. She had nowhere to go, and worse, no one seemed to care. When she finally sat down on the sidewalk with her bag on her lap, the sun was already burning the thin skin of her face, and her legs were shaking from hunger, pain, despair. Some passers-by looked at her, but none of them stopped. Others didn't even hide their contempt. An old lady crossed the street, afraid of being bothered. A delivery man looked at her and turned his head away, and there she was, Clarice, sitting on the ground of life as if she were invisible, an elderly, humble lady who had only ever had her heart, and now she didn't even have a house anymore. The cruelest thing of all is that she didn't even seem surprised. It was as if the world had confirmed what she already knew, that those who have little cannot make mistakes, cannot delay, cannot fail. There is no room for compassion when poverty enters the scene. And that hurt more than any eviction. Time passed and no one appeared. No outstretched hand, no friendly word. The entire neighborhood, which had so enjoyed commenting on her life, now pretended she didn't exist. And she remained there, motionless, with her face in her hands, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on escaping. She didn't cry loudly, like someone trying to attract attention. She cried quietly, in a way that only those who have felt their soul breaking can understand. Except that fate, fate has its own ways of righting justice, because across the street someone was watching, someone who had seen that woman hand over the only piece of bread she had, someone who had heard the jeers and remained silent, and now someone who saw her there, alone and homeless, holding a bag with everything she had left in the world. Mr. Malik, the man everyone thought was just another beggar, was watching everything. And what he felt at that moment, well, that is yet to explode in a way that no one, absolutely no one, is prepared to see. The day was already turning to late afternoon when the sound of tires caught her attention. A large black car with tinted windows stopped slowly right in front of the sidewalk where Clarice was still sitting, exhausted, with her bag on her lap and her face marked with dried tears. She didn't even look at it right away. She thought it was just someone else trying to pass by, maybe someone about to complain about her being there, like they had done before. But that car wasn't just any car. It was the kind that no one in that neighborhood usually saw around there. Shiny, new, with a presence that silenced the movement around it. That's when people started to notice. The car door opened. A lawyer in a tie or an important politician didn't get out. It was him who got out. The same man who the morning before had been lying on the sidewalk, shivering from the cold, with an unshaven beard and eyes full of pain. Only now there was nothing of the beggar about him anymore. He was wearing a tailored, elegant black suit with polished shoes and the posture of someone who carries much more than money. Presence. Power. But what really made everyone stop was not that. It was what he did next. He walked towards Clarice slowly, while silence took over the block. The gossipy neighbor, Colette, who had been making fun of him so much, was there too, standing on the corner, her mouth half open, trying to understand what she was seeing. The same man she had seen receiving bread from the crazy old woman now seemed to be someone big, important. And then he stopped right in front of the fallen lady. Clarice looked up slowly, still not understanding. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in confusion. The face was the same, but the man was different. He was no longer dirty or broken. He was firm, clean, confident. She tried to get up, even thought about apologizing, thinking that maybe she was bothering him, but he was faster. Without saying a word, he knelt right in front of her. That's right, he knelt, a millionaire in a suit and tie on the floor, in front of an elderly woman, empty, with a cloth bag on her lap. He took her hands respectfully, carefully, truthfully. He looked into her eyes, exactly as she had done with him before, and said in a firm voice, but visibly moved, "It was you who saved my soul yesterday." The sentence fell like lightning. The people around held their breath. Clarice herself needed a few seconds to process it. She still didn't understand. Saved? What do you mean? She had only given him a loaf of bread. A simple gesture, nothing special in her mind. But for him, that had been everything. He continued, without letting go of her hands. He said with a choked voice that it was Mr. Malik, businessman, investor, owner of companies in several countries. He said he was tired, exhausted from living surrounded by fake people, and that he disguised himself as poor from time to test people's hearts, that for a long time he had been looking for someone who would truly do good without knowing who he was dealing with, and that, until that day, he had never found someone, until he met Clarice. And as he spoke, the entire neighborhood watched. No one blinked. Some were open-mouthed, others embarrassed, some even had tears in their eyes. The silence there was no longer one of contempt. It was one of shock, a shock that only grew, because everyone was about to discover that this simple act of kindness, giving a piece of bread, was going to turn into something gigantic. But wait, what Malik did next, no one could have imagined that. And that's exactly where the story takes an even more unbelievable turn. Colette, the neighbor who had fed off the humiliation of others for so long, watched that scene with her heart beating faster than she would like to admit. Until then, she had been just another spectator in the spectacle of other people's shame, always ready to make a poisonous joke or a contemptuous phrase, especially when it involved Clarisse. But at that moment, the tables turned, and it turned beautifully. There, before her eyes, and those of the entire neighborhood, was a man she herself had called a rag, street trash, bum, and he was a millionaire, a powerful, respected man who now knelt before the woman she had always made a point of putting down. Clarisse, who she had called crazy, forgetful, useless, was now the center of a scene that seemed like something out of a movie, and worse, a real scene, public, unquestionable. Colette's wounded pride wouldn't let her stand still. With a nervous, forced smile, she fixed the scarf in her hair, straightened her old dress, and approached as if she had always been there. She tried to hide it, feigning solidarity, as if she suddenly cared about Clarisse. And then, with the utmost nerve, she took a step forward, opened her arms, and said, "Ah, monsieur, what a beautiful moment. What a wonderful thing you are doing for this woman. I always said she was special, always. Clarisse is a hidden gem, isn't she?" Before Malik could answer anything, one of the security guards, who had been watching everything closely until then, stood between her and his boss. Tall, with a firm expression, he raised his hand and said in a dry, blunt voice, "The Lord doesn't want to talk to you." The sentence cut through the air like a razor. Colette froze. She stood there, her mouth half open, a smile stuck in the middle of her face, trying to figure out if it was really real, but it was. Embarrassment painted her face red instantly. The neighbors, who had previously laughed along with her, now watched in silence. No one defended her, no one laughed. It was the kind of humiliation that didn't need any noise. The fact that she had been ignored said it all. And Malik, he didn't even look at her, not out of arrogance, but because he knew that this was part of the silent justice that life sometimes delivers. He didn't need to raise his voice or expose anyone. The gesture was enough. And in that moment, everyone there understood who was mocking and who was helping, who was pointing and who was extending a hand. The difference was clearer than ever. Clarisse, still sitting, watched everything without fully understanding what was happening, not because she lacked intelligence, but because she never expected justice. She never lived for applause. She did good because it was the right thing to do, that was all. But now she was seeing with her own eyes that God somehow sees. And when he sees, he acts. And what Malik would do after that? Well, no one, not even Clarisse, was ready to witness that. Because what came next wasn't just reward. It was destiny being rewritten before everyone's eyes. Malik didn't say anything else to his neighbor. He didn't need to. He just looked back at Clarisse, still sitting there, with the same expression of simplicity and kindness she had had since the beginning. But now, along with her tired look, there was also something different. A glow, a timid hope emerging after so many years of abandonment. He extended his hand to her, with the same respect with which she had extended that piece of bread, and simply said, "Let's go." She looked around, not really understanding. For a moment, she thought he was joking, but the car was there, open, waiting for her. The security guards, discreet, just nodded. And before she could hesitate, Malik helped her up, picked up the bag with the torn clothes, and led her to the vehicle with a delicacy that no one expected from such a powerful man. Along the way, he told her more about who he was, about his search for true humanity, and how that simple gesture, a piece of bread delivered with love, had touched him in a way that no fortune could. Clarice listened to everything in silence, with wet eyes, unable to imagine where this would lead, until the car stopped. The gate to the mansion opened slowly, and she thought it was a mistake. She thought they were going to visit someone, or that he was going to help her and then take her to some shelter. But no, the mansion was hers. The house, huge, with gardens, balconies, flowers, and the smell of new life, was being handed over with everything. A room with a warm bed, new clothes, plenty of food, medicine, medical care, comfort. Malik took care of everything, as if he were taking care of his own mother, as if he were giving her back something that the whole world had taken away. On the first night, Clarice slept like she hadn't slept in years. Her belly was full, her body was warm, and, most importantly, her soul was at peace. For the first time, she felt that she was seen, that she was valued, that she was no longer alone. And when Malik came to say goodbye that night, he didn't make a speech. He just knelt down in front of her again, held her hands firmly and said, "You reminded me what true love is." That sentence echoed in her mind for days, because honestly, she never imagined that such a small gesture, the last piece of bread, could turn into all this. She never gave anything expecting something in return. She only did it because it was the right thing to do. But now, she saw with her own eyes that when good is planted with truth, the fruits come. And sometimes they come in the form of a miracle. And it was there, in that new home, sitting on a huge balcony, watching the sun rise as if the day had been made just for her, that Clarice understood the greatest lesson of her life. Those who plant good things reap miracles. God sees the heart, even when the world closes its eyes. And so she took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and gave thanks, not for the money, not for the house, but for staying true to who she was, even when everything seemed to be going wrong, because in the end, what she gave was just a piece of bread, but what she got was the world back. This story touched something deep inside you, didn't it? Because stories like Clarice's aren't just about her. They're about each and every one of us. It's about believing that even when the world turns its back, there are still people who see with their hearts. If at any point you felt goosebumps, emotions, or simply thought, "This makes sense to me," it's because this story really spoke to you. And now it can reach many more people. With a like and a subscription to the channel, you can spread this message to those who need to hear it most. Comment the word below miracle if you also believe that good always comes back, even when everything seems lost. And also comment part 2 if you want to know what happened next to Clarice in this new life, because you can bet there's more. But now pay attention. The video that is appearing on the screen brings another breathtaking story. It is not a sequel, but it is from the same universe. And I guarantee you what happens in this next story will surprise you even more. It is a twist that no one saw coming, and that will make you rethink everything again. Click here and continue feeling with us. This next story will move you even deeper.